Dawn broke over Red Mesa, not with a gentle golden light, but with the blistering glare of a sky already aching for rain. For months, the sun had hammered down, day after day, until the red earth itself seemed to bleed beneath its heat. The junipers stood brittle and ghostly, their shadows thin and mean, and every living thing in the desert, coyote, rabbit, hawk, had been forced to reckon with thirst. Even the wind, once a song across the mesa, had faded to a rasp. Beneath that silent sky, Ruby moved like a wraith, her belly heavy with new life, her breath sharp with exhaustion. Every step sent a ripple of pain up her legs, but she pressed on, ears flicking at every hint of movement. She was a bobcat, proud and fierce, never tamed by man, but now she limped through backyards, across cracked driveways, through the bones of an abandoned farmhouse where the walls had peeled away like old skin. Behind her, always just a few paces back, Leo watched her with eyes sharp as knives, her mate, her shadow, every sense straining against the threats all around. The two of them had roamed these canyons since they were yearlings, playing hide-and-seek with the shadows, living on the edge of hunger but never tipping over. But this year, something was different. The creeks had dried to dust, the cacti shriveled, and the canyons echoed with the emptiness of lost things. Even the lizards seemed fewer now, and every night, the howl of the coyotes grew closer and bolder. Hunger gnawed at them both, but Ruby's was deeper, a primal ache, the need to protect what grew inside her. Somewhere out there, whispered in the secret language of the wild, was a promise, a place of water and shade, where humans, for once, offered safety instead of danger. Red Mesa Wildlife Sanctuary. They had never dared to cross that invisible line between wild and human before, but now, as Ruby faltered and nearly stumbled, Leo nuzzled her flank, as if urging her onward. In his eyes was not just fear for himself, but a desperate hope for the future she carried. As the sun lifted, the world seemed to shrink. Cars thundered past on the distant highway, their heat shimmering on the asphalt. Once a pickup slowed, an old man squinting at the pair of bobcats slipping through the brush. Leo bristled, baring his teeth, but the man only shook his head, muttering something about ghost cats before rattling away. The danger was everywhere, and so was the temptation. On one side, the ever-present threat of people who might shoot first and ask later. On the other, the lingering dread of the coyotes, already tracking their scent through the sage. Mid-morning, as they crossed an open stretch near an empty water trough, a sudden bark rang out, sharp and close. 3 coyotes materialized from behind a fallen fence, eyes bright with hunger, teeth flashing. Ruby's heart thudded in her chest, her muscles screaming, but Leo stepped between her and the threat, shoulders low, a snarl rumbling deep in his chest. The coyotes fanned out, circling, emboldened by the weakness they smelled. One darted forward. Leo lunged, claws slashing, his fury a warning. The coyote yelped and fell back, but the others pressed closer. For a long, breathless moment, it seemed everything would end there beneath the pitiless sun. But then, from the road, came the sudden screech of tires and the slam of a car door. A human voice shouted, echoing through the dry air. Startled, the coyotes scattered, vanishing as quickly as they'd appeared. Leo whirled, wild-eyed, but the human never came closer. Only the sound of a door slamming again and a car driving off. Ruby tried to stand tall, but her legs buckled. Leo nudged her, his own breath ragged. There was no time to rest. The heat would only get worse, and every minute spent in the open risked another attack. So they pressed on, slipping through the chain-link fence of a backyard where a sprinkler had left a damp patch of grass. Ruby collapsed for a moment, lapping up what little water she could, her sides heaving. Leo stood sentinel, eyes darting, as a house cat glared at them from a windowsill. Beyond the backyard, the landscape began to shift. The earth softened, the brush thickened. Somewhere ahead was the rumored sanctuary, a patch of green in a world gone brown. Ruby pushed herself up, every instinct screaming for her to stop, to hide, but the scent of water and the promise of safety drove her forward. As they neared the edge of Red Mesa, the world grew quieter. A hush fell, as if even the desert held its breath. Here the land was still wounded, still parched, but hope shimmered at the horizon. And as the sun reached its brutal noon peak, Ruby stumbled, then righted herself. Leo's nose pressed to her side. Together, battered but unbroken, they slipped into the shadows of the sanctuary, not knowing if what waited was salvation or another trap, but knowing there was no turning back. The moment Ruby and Leo crossed beneath the battered wooden sign reading Red Mesa Wildlife Preserve, no trespassing, sanctuary in progress, something shifted in the air. The world on this side of the fence was changed. Lush by comparison, filled with unexpected shadows and green. Cottonwoods arched overhead, leaves trembling in the dry breeze, and somewhere nearby, a windmill creaked softly, drawing water from deep beneath the cracked earth. But even here, danger hovered. At the edge of the preserve, hidden by a stand of mesquite, two pairs of human eyes watched the Bobcat's every move. Megan Carter sat in the small ranger's cabin, her boots propped on the dusty desk, cradling a chipped mug of coffee that had long since gone cold. Her hair, streaked with silver, was tied back in a messy braid. Lines of fatigue etched her face, though her eyes, sharp blue, always searching, never missed a flicker on the video monitor before her. Beside her, Dr. Sam Walker tapped at his tablet, eyes narrowed in disbelief. "That's them," he muttered, barely above a whisper. "A female, pregnant, and a male, Leo, right? They've crossed the main boundary." Megan leaned forward, heart thudding. "You ever seen anything like it? Out in broad daylight. Poor things look half dead." She squinted, reading the pain in Ruby's careful steps and the fierce protectiveness in Leo's every motion. Something about the sight pricked at a memory Megan kept locked away. A memory of another body, small and vulnerable, fighting for life. Sam, always the biologist first, hesitated. "We can't interfere, Megan. Not unless it's life or death. That's the protocol." His words sounded firm, but the uncertainty in his voice was clear. They'd had this debate before, over abandoned fawns and wounded hawks. Sanctuary meant sanctuary, from the world, and sometimes from well-meaning human hands. Outside, the Bobcats moved slowly through the sanctuary's margin, alert to every crackle and shift in the undergrowth. Ruby's head hung low, the weight of her body pulling her forward. Leo stayed close, his body tense as a drawn wire. The scent of water was stronger here. Somewhere a hidden creek gurgled, almost too faint for human ears, but the promise was enough to keep them going. Inside the cabin, Megan was already moving, pulling up camera feeds, tracking the Bobcats as they crept toward the old waterhole. She couldn't help herself. "Look at her, Sam. She's limping. That's not just fatigue. There's something wrong." Sam tried to sound detached, but the concern in his eyes gave him away. "We log it, we observe. That's the job." He hesitated, glancing at Megan. "You know the rule, no hands-on intervention, not unless the animal's suffering is beyond hope." But Megan had always been ruled more by her heart than by regulations. She'd once been a paramedic. She'd seen too many lines drawn in sand, too many lives lost by waiting just a minute too long. She gritted her teeth. "Some rules were made to be broken, Sam." Before Sam could reply, the monitor flickered. On the feed, Ruby staggered, her legs giving way. She collapsed at the muddy edge of the waterhole, her breath coming in harsh, staccato pants. Leo hovered nearby, nudging her with his nose, frantic and helpless. In the green-tinged glow of the camera, Megan could see the ripple of contractions across Ruby's side. "Labor," Sam murmured, his face turning grim. "It's starting." Megan felt her chest tighten. She remembered nights spent watching hospital monitors, willing a heartbeat to stay steady. She shook herself, focusing on the present. "She's in trouble. She needs help, Sam." Sam shook his head, as if trying to convince himself more than Megan. "We wait. Nature has to take its course. Intervening could do more harm than good." But outside, the struggle had already begun. Ruby's body shuddered with pain, every breath a battle. She tried to rise, to crawl closer to the water, but her strength failed her. Leo paced around her in tight circles, ears laid flat, tail flicking with nervous agitation. The world narrowed to the circle of suffering around the waterhole, one wild mother fighting to bring new life into a world that seemed to want to spit it out. And still, in the sanctuary's shadow, other dangers lingered. Coyotes circled at a distance, their yellow eyes catching the afternoon sun. One, braver than the rest, crept closer, drawn by the scent of weakness. Leo let out a rasping snarl, daring the scavenger to test him. The coyote hesitated, hunger warring with caution, before slinking away. Inside, the tension was mounting. Megan hovered by the door, her hands clenched, her mind racing with worst-case scenarios. "If she doesn't deliver soon, she'll die out there. You know that." Sam said nothing. He stared at the feed, jaw set, wrestling with the rules he'd spent a career defending. As evening bled across the mesa, the sounds outside softened, birds settling in for the night, the wind sighing through the cottonwoods. But in the den, the struggle raged on. Ruby whimpered softly, eyes glazing with pain. Leo pressed his body close to hers, silent, every muscle trembling. Megan leaned into the monitor, whispering words no wild ear could hear. "Hold on, girl. You're not alone." She turned to Sam, voice raw. "We can't just watch her die, Sam. Not if there's something we can do." Sam didn't answer, but the conflict in his eyes was clear. Between the pull of compassion and the weight of rules, the boundary between wild and human seemed thinner than ever. Outside, beneath the heavy Arizona stars, the fate of one small family and the humans who watched them hung in the balance, waiting for someone to take the first impossible step. Night descended over Red Mesa, deep and absolute, swallowing the last traces of heat as the desert world held its breath. The wind had died, replaced by a velvet hush broken only by the occasional cry of a distant owl and the soft rustle of cottonwood leaves. But inside the ranger station, there was no peace, only the relentless flicker of surveillance monitors and the heavy, anxious silence between Megan and Sam. They watched as Ruby labored in the patchy shadows beside the waterhole, her fur damp with sweat and mud, her eyes glazed with exhaustion. Each contraction rippled through her body in visible waves. Sometimes, she lifted her head and let out a low, trembling moan, half a growl, half a plea. It cut through Megan like a blade, stirring memories she had tried so hard to bury. Leo circled the den in restless agony. He was powerless, torn between instincts to fight, flee, or comfort. Every time Ruby cried out, he stiffened, ready to face any threat. The world beyond their little sanctuary was dangerous. He knew that too well. Now, with his mate so vulnerable, every shadow became an enemy. The scents of coyote and raccoon drifted on the air, and once a great horned owl swooped low overhead, its wings ghosting across the moonlit grass. Inside, Sam tried to keep his focus clinical, making notes on his tablet, tracking every movement, every minute shift in Ruby's breathing. But his jaw clenched tighter with every labored breath. "She's been in distress for hours now," he murmured, not meeting Megan's eyes. Megan barely heard him. She was caught in the past, standing in a hospital corridor, cold and helpless, as monitors beeped and nurses whispered. The memory of her own child's final hours haunted her. How she had watched, unable to cross the gulf between life and loss, held back by rules and protocols. She shook herself, fighting off the ache, and focused on the screens. "Come on, Ruby," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You're stronger than this. You have to be." On the camera feed, Ruby panted, her sides heaving. She tried to shift positions, but her limbs trembled. Leo inched closer, his body low and wary, nudging her gently with his nose, licking the blood and dirt from her ears. He stayed vigilant, never sleeping, as if he could shoulder her suffering by sheer will. Megan glanced at Sam, who caught her look and shook his head. "Not yet," he said quietly. "We wait. We have to let nature run its course." But Megan's patience was worn raw. She found herself talking aloud to Ruby, knowing it was useless, but unable to stop. "I know you're scared, girl," she murmured at the screen. "But you're not alone. I'm right here. Just a little longer." In the wild, hours passed differently. The agony stretched out, each minute thick with dread. A thin drizzle began. Rare, a miracle in itself. Raindrops pattered on the roof, sliding down the windows, beating on the Bobcat's fur. Ruby barely seemed to notice, lost in her own battle. But Megan found herself hoping the rain would bring luck, or at least mercy. Leo left the den for only a moment, stalking the perimeter, driving off a bold raccoon and scattering a pair of lurking coyotes with a ferocious snarl. His courage was desperate, raw, and when he returned to Ruby's side, he pressed against her, as if promising to fight the world itself for her sake. Megan watched, hands white-knuckled around her mug, whispering encouragement that dissolved into the silent room. "You can do this, Ruby. Don't give up now. There's more to fight for than you know." Sam's composure began to crack. He turned from the screens, his shoulders tense. "She's getting weaker. If she can't deliver soon..." He didn't finish the sentence. They both knew what it meant. The hours crawled by, Ruby's cries faded to low whimpers, her strength draining with every failed push. Her eyes fluttered, unfocused, and even Leo's fierce spirit began to falter. He pawed at the dirt, paced in anxious circles, and let out a long, mournful yowl that echoed through the trees. Inside, Megan relived the helplessness of that hospital night. The moment when she realized no one was coming to save her child, the way her own hope had drained away. She couldn't bear to watch it happen again, even if this time the suffering wore fur and claws. She leaned forward, speaking to Ruby as if words could build a bridge across the glass. "Don't leave them, Ruby. Not now. You've come too far. Please." The desert seemed to listen. The storm passed, leaving the world clean but cold. The only sound Ruby's ragged breathing and Leo's quiet, frantic pacing. Then something shifted. On the monitor, Ruby tried once more. Her body convulsed, teeth bared, breath caught in her throat. But nothing happened. Her body sagged, beaten by exhaustion. Megan's heart clenched, but she refused to look away. Sam put a gentle hand on Megan's shoulder. "We still have time. She's not gone yet. Let's just keep watching." For the rest of the night, the two humans kept vigil, silent but united, eyes never leaving the screen. Megan whispered encouragements. Sam scribbled notes. But both knew the truth. They were waiting not just for new life, but for the moment when their principles might be tested beyond what any protocol could excuse. The hours dragged on. Ruby shivered in the mud. Leo pressed tight against her, and Megan, heart pounding, clung to hope. In that quiet room, with the world outside washed clean by rain and darkness, the line between wild and human blurred, held together by nothing but patience, pain, and the stubborn refusal to surrender. Dawn was still hours away, but already the first flickers of decision were burning in Megan's mind. She would not let history repeat itself. This time she would not watch helplessly from behind glass. Dawn crept up on Red Mesa with a bruised, purplish light. For a moment, the world felt as if it was holding its breath, caught in that uneasy hush between night and day when anything could happen. Inside the ranger cabin, Megan Carter hadn't slept. Neither had Sam. The two sat side by side, faces lit ghostly by the monitor's glow, hearts pounding to the slow, uncertain rhythm of Ruby's labored breaths. The camera's night vision shimmered green and gray, but the scene it captured was heartbreakingly clear. Ruby hadn't moved for hours, her sides heaving shallowly, eyes half closed. Her body looked spent, the muscles around her belly slack and trembling. Leo lay curled beside her, chin resting on her shoulder, his own energy spent in anxiety and useless devotion. Megan glanced at the clock. Another hour lost, another hour closer to the edge. Sam's hands trembled slightly as he sipped bitter coffee, eyes hollow with worry. "She should have delivered by now," he said quietly. "Something's wrong." Megan nodded, her jaw set. "I know." She'd been watching the signs, the twitching limbs, the weak, pitiful mules, the silence where there should have been new life. Every instinct screamed at her to move, to act, but the rules were as heavy as chains. Protocol said, "Observe, do not interfere, trust the wild." But Protocol had never sat awake through a night like this. Protocol hadn't watched hope fade minute by minute on a hospital monitor. Megan pressed her forehead to the cool glass of the window. Beyond it, the desert shimmered with first light. She remembered suddenly a night years ago in Phoenix. Rain battering the ambulance roof, a tiny fist gripping her finger as she willed a newborn to take another breath. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. But she'd always acted, always tried. She looked over at Sam, who was lost in his own memory, tapping his pen against a faded field manual. "Do you think she knows we're here?" he asked softly. "That we're watching?" Megan's answer came out in a whisper. "I think she knows she's not alone. That's something, isn't it?" A heavy silence settled. Outside, a pack of coyotes yipped distantly, their voices raw with hunger and frustration. Somewhere a scrub jay scolded, a bright flash of blue in the dusty dawn. The world was waking up, but in the sanctuary time seemed frozen. Leo lifted his head, nose twitching. He rose, circled Ruby, then padded slowly toward the direction of the ranger cabin. Ears flat, body low, every muscle tense with uncertainty. He stopped 100 feet away, sitting in the brittle grass, eyes fixed on the human shelter, as if weighing the odds. Sam noticed first. "He's coming closer," he murmured, a mix of awe and anxiety in his tone. Megan's heart leapt. "He's desperate. He knows she needs help." "Or he's blaming us for her suffering," Sam countered, voice tight. Leo waited in the open, tail twitching, gaze never wavering. It was a silent plea. Or maybe a warning. Megan stared back at him through the window, breath fogging the glass, feeling the pull of responsibility so fiercely it hurt. Minutes crawled by. Ruby's breathing grew ragged, a harsh rasp in the microphone feed. Every so often, She tried to shift, but her legs buckled beneath her, and she collapsed again. Megan's mind raced. Was she witnessing a natural tragedy, or a failure of her own courage? She felt the weight of every ranger who'd warned her, every supervisor who'd quoted the manual. Let nature take its course. The wild must remain wild. But nature, she thought bitterly, didn't care about suffering. Nature was cruel. It wasn't mercy that let a mother die in agony. It was indifference. Unable to sit any longer, Megan rose and paced the cramped cabin. The old floorboards creaked beneath her boots. Sam watched her, his own mask of objectivity cracking. Finally, Megan spoke, her voice raw. Do you regret it, Sam? All the times we followed the rules, when maybe we should have done more? Sam hesitated. A shadow crossed his face, old grief surfacing. There was a lynx up north, years ago, badly wounded, probably hit by a car. I was new, scared to break protocol. I waited for approval that never came. She died that night. I told myself I was doing my job, but it never felt right. The confession hung between them, a heavy truth. Megan met his eyes, and for the first time since this ordeal began, she saw the man behind the badge, tired, flawed, and deeply human. I don't want to watch another one die because we're scared of consequences, Megan said quietly. I can't do it, Sam. Not again. Before Sam could answer, Leo took another step closer, stopping just outside the thin line where the sanctuary's safety ended and human territory began. He sat, stared, his body trembling, eyes bright with pain and hope. Dawn finally broke, bleeding gold across the mesa, painting everything in colors too harsh and beautiful to bear. Megan pressed her hand to the window, palm against the glass, wishing she could reach across the distance and offer comfort. In the den, Ruby whimpered softly, her breaths quickening, as if sensing the nearness of help. Megan felt the old ache sharpen in her chest. She remembered the fear, the helplessness, the moment when hope had slipped through her fingers. She looked at Sam, her decision made. If we do nothing, she dies. You know that. Sam nodded slowly. The rules were there for a reason, but sometimes the right thing wasn't in the book. Outside, Leo remained, watchful, waiting, trusting in a way wild animals almost never do. Megan understood the message. The wild could ask for help, even if it couldn't speak. And sometimes, the only thing braver than following the rules was daring to break them. Inside that cabin, as the world shifted from night to day, two humans found themselves standing at the edge of their own boundaries, ready, at last, to step across. The decision was no longer a question. Megan looked at Sam and nodded once, a simple movement that carried the weight of all the sleepless hours, the silent pleas, the terrible ache of helplessness. If we do nothing, she dies, she repeated. The words hung in the cabin, undeniable now. Sam closed his eyes for a moment, then drew a shaky breath and began gathering the supplies: latex gloves, a field surgical kit, antibiotics, a single syringe prepped with oxytocin, and a portable radio for backup. Megan's hands moved with familiar purpose as she slipped the kit into a weathered canvas bag, her mind racing through every emergency she'd ever faced, human or animal. But this felt different, wilder, riskier, edged with a kind of hope that felt almost forbidden. Outside, Leo waited at the edge of the clearing, his golden eyes reflecting both terror and trust. He didn't bolt as the humans stepped out of the cabin, didn't snarl or crouch to spring. Instead, he stood his ground, ears flat, but gaze unwavering. The sun was climbing, washing the land in fierce light, sharpening every shadow. The sanctuary was waking. Birds darted between the cottonwoods, a jackrabbit froze in the tall grass, and the distant whine of a chainsaw from a neighboring property reminded them both how fragile this protected place truly was. Megan and Sam moved carefully, not speaking, every movement slow and deliberate. Megan felt the weight of the radio against her chest, her heart thudding even louder. She scanned the brush for coyotes or raccoons, for anything that might decide to test the boundaries of this uneasy truce between wild and human. Leo stepped back, muscles coiled. Megan stopped, her voice low and steady. "It's okay. We're here to help." She knew he didn't understand the words, but tone mattered. She let her fear slip into the earth, replaced it with the calm confidence she'd honed during a lifetime of emergencies. Sam kept behind her, the medical bag at his side, his eyes never leaving Leo. "If he charges, drop to your knees and stay still," he whispered. Megan nodded, eyes forward. The den was little more than a scrape in the muddy bank, half sheltered by a fallen cottonwood. Ruby lay sprawled on her side, her body trembling, breath so shallow Megan could barely see her ribs move. The scent of blood and sweat hung heavy in the air, and when Megan knelt beside the den's entrance, she could see Ruby's claws gouging the earth in pain. Leo whined, a deep, uncertain sound. He took a step toward Megan, then stopped, chest heaving, torn between fight and flight. For a moment, the world paused, just 3 hearts beating in the early morning stillness, each aware of the invisible lines they were crossing. Megan reached into the kit, her hands only trembling a little. She drew up the dose of oxytocin, glanced at Sam for confirmation. He nodded, biting his lip. "Easy, girl," Megan whispered. "We're not here to hurt you." She edged closer, talking softly, keeping her movements small, non-threatening. Ruby's eyes, cloudy with exhaustion, flicked open. For a heartbeat, they met Megan's, wild gold on human blue. In that gaze, Megan saw not just pain, but an ancient, desperate trust. Leo tensed, baring his teeth in a silent warning, but he didn't move. Megan stretched out the syringe, steadying herself, then, swiftly, gently, slid the needle into Ruby's flank and pressed the plunger. Ruby flinched, but didn't lash out. Megan pulled back, every muscle in her body ready to spring away if needed. Sam knelt beside her, scanning Ruby for signs of infection or wounds, his voice low. "Her pulse is thready, but she's hanging on. Let's hope this works." They retreated several feet, crouching behind the tangled roots of the cottonwood, eyes locked on the den. Leo crept to Ruby's side, pressing his body against hers, licking her ear. For a long, agonizing moment, nothing happened. Megan's mind raced with all the ways this could go wrong. The injection failing, Ruby too weak, Leo turning on them in rage. Time stretched. Ruby's breathing hitched, then steadied. Her body tensed, the muscles along her sides rippling as the drug took effect. Megan held her breath. Sam squeezed her shoulder, silent encouragement passing between them. The radio crackled, another ranger checking in. Megan silenced it quickly, praying their actions wouldn't be discovered before they had a chance to help. If headquarters found out what they'd done, they could lose their jobs, or worse, the sanctuary could lose its funding. But none of that mattered now, not with a life on the line. Sweat trickled down Megan's spine, but she stayed perfectly still. She watched as Ruby, her breath growing stronger, shifted position, her back legs pushing against the earth. Guttural sound broke from her throat. Not quite a scream, but as close as any wild creature might come. Suddenly, movement. A contraction, stronger than before. Megan and Sam leaned forward, hardly daring to hope. Leo licked Ruby's muzzle, his own body trembling in shared effort. Another minute passed, then another. Ruby's sides heaved, her claws dug deep. Megan caught herself whispering prayers she hadn't spoken in years, half to Ruby, half to the universe. The tension was unbearable. Then, Ruby cried out, her body arching. Megan's heart leapt. Sam squeezed her hand. Come on, come on. The world seemed to narrow to the den and the two wild hearts beating within it. Everything else, the rules, the fear, the risk, fell away. Ruby bore down one last time. Her body shuddered. Megan saw the kitten's tiny head, slick and pale, emerging. Leo nudged Ruby's neck, frantic encouragement. The moment hung suspended in the dawn, finally, with a wet gasp and a rush of movement. The kitten slipped free. Megan's hands trembled, not with fear, but with relief so sharp it was almost pain. Leo sniffed the newborn, uncertain, then turned his eyes to Megan, just for a second. In that wild, wordless look, Megan felt a bolt of connection. Not dominance, not ownership, just gratitude, fear, hope, and something deeper, understanding. Sam exhaled slowly, his eyes glistening. We did it, he whispered. But it wasn't over yet. Ruby was still weak, the kitten barely moving, and the sun was rising on a world that would not easily forgive broken boundaries. Megan and Sam knew they'd risked everything, and yet, kneeling there in the mud, surrounded by the wild, it didn't feel like a mistake. It felt, at last, like mercy. For a heartbeat after the delivery, all the world seemed to hold its breath, wild and human alike. Ruby's eyes fluttered, her body limp, her newborn still and slick at her side. Megan crouched behind the tangled roots of the cottonwood, her chest tight, heart racing with hope and terror. Sam pressed close beside her, both of them silent, barely breathing as they watched the fragile scene just a few yards away. Leo pressed his nose to Ruby's cheek, the tip of his tail flicking anxiously. His golden eyes darted from Megan to the tiny, unmoving bundle in the mud, then back to Ruby. The trust between species, so hard-won and so rarely given, was on a knife's edge. One wrong move, one loud word or sudden motion, and the thin thread holding this moment together could snap. Megan's whole body ached with the urge to help more. She knew that in the wild, even after such a struggle, there were no guarantees. The little one might not survive. Ruby herself, drained by pain and exhaustion, might not recover. Megan felt every second stretched taut with possibility, with danger. Then Leo moved. He rose to his feet, fur bristling, and placed himself between Ruby and the humans. His body a trembling shield. His growl low but pleading. Megan didn't move. She knew trust was something you built inch by inch, risk by risk. In that moment, she was more animal than woman, letting silence and stillness speak for her. Sam whispered, "He remembers you. He knows you from last winter. The rescue, remember?" Megan nodded. The memory flashed. Leo as a yearling, caught in a snare. The wild terror in his eyes. The shock when Megan had cut him free and slipped away before the others arrived. Trust, she'd learned, wasn't about words. It was about what you did when no one else was looking. She held Leo's gaze, lowering herself just a little more, her open hands visible and empty. "It's okay, big guy," she murmured, barely above the wind. "No more pain. We're just here." A moment passed. Leo's muscles quivered. His tail lashed once, but then he stepped aside, barely a foot, but enough. Megan's eyes stung with relief. It wasn't surrender. It was hope raw and naked, daring to believe. At Ruby's side, the kitten still didn't move. The urgency surged. Megan reached into the bag for a clean towel, meeting Sam's eyes. He nodded, and together they inched forward, every step announced by a low murmur. "We're just going to help her, that's all. Easy now, easy." Megan stopped just short of the den's entrance, the muddy earth cool beneath her knees. She extended the towel, careful not to touch Ruby, who now opened her eyes, wild, wide, but unafraid. Megan waited, breath shallow. Leo hovered close, watching every move. Gently, Megan used the edge of the towel to nudge the kitten toward Ruby's belly, clearing away some of the afterbirth and mud. The tiny thing, a she, Megan could see, let out the barest whimper, a sound so faint it made the hair stand up on Megan's arms. Ruby, with infinite effort, turned her head and began to lick her newborn with slow, deliberate strokes. Each pass of her tongue seemed to coax life into the kitten, who squirmed, then opened her mouth and let out a kitten-sized wail. Sam let out a shaky breath, his hand on Megan's shoulder. "She's breathing. She's alive." His voice cracked, years of scientific detachment melting away. For a long minute, all Megan could do was watch as the miracle unfolded. A mother, a father, and their new life huddled together in the uncertain light of morning. The wild had let her in, just for a moment, and she'd met it on its own terms. But the danger was far from over. Ruby was still dangerously weak, her breathing uneven. Megan checked her with a trained eye, careful not to touch, but watching for any sign of bleeding or fever. "She needs rest. She needs luck," Megan whispered. Leo seemed to understand, curling around Ruby and the kitten, his whole body a living barricade. Megan and Sam eased back, every muscle protesting the retreat. They crouched behind the roots, whispering a plan. "We have to let her recover. No more interference unless it's life or death. If anyone finds out what we did—" Sam trailed off, but the unspoken threat lingered. Megan nodded, but she couldn't regret her choice. The cost, whatever it was, felt worth it. She stood, stretching cramped legs, watching as the family lay together, the den finally quiet, but for the steady sound of breathing and the soft mewling of the kitten. Back at the cabin, the aftermath began to settle in. Megan washed her hands in silence, scrubbing away mud and blood, but not the memory. She stared at her reflection in the mirror, tired eyes, lines etched deep by grief and hope. She saw herself not as a savior, but as a witness. Sometimes the bravest thing you could do was cross the line. Sam wrote notes for the record, choosing his words carefully, protecting both Ruby and Megan. "We observed an unexpected delivery. Mother and kitten appear stable." The truth was messier, harder to fit in a report, but some truths lived best in the quiet space between lines. For hours, Megan and Sam watched through the cameras as the sun rose, as Ruby's strength slowly returned and the kitten nursed, her tiny body pressed close to her mother's fur. Leo never left their side, always alert, always ready. A storm gathered on the horizon, clouds purple and bruised, promising rain or more trouble. Megan stood on the porch, breathing in the charged air, feeling the tension ease for the first time in days. The wild had trusted her, if only for a moment, and she had not betrayed it. But she knew this trust was fragile. The sanctuary's rules had been broken, and consequences would follow. The news would spread, among rangers, among animals, across the invisible boundaries that separated worlds. Yet as Megan watched Ruby, Leo, and their kitten, alive together against all odds, she believed that some lines were meant to be crossed, and some acts of courage changed everything, even if only for one wild family on the edge of Red Mesa. The storm never broke, but the air at Red Mesa throbbed with tension. Megan and Sam stayed in the cabin, half watching the monitors, half listening to the silence outside. Each minute crawled by, thick with worry and hope, as they waited to see if the gamble they'd taken would truly become a miracle, or if it would end in heartbreak. Ruby's den was dark and sheltered, but the cameras caught every twitch and flicker. Her sides still heaved, her breath sometimes shallow, sometimes strong. The tiny kitten, already christened Willow in Megan's thoughts, for the way her little body bent and stretched, searching for warmth, curled close to Ruby's belly. Every so often, Willow let out a thin, hungry wail. Leo, never straying far, hovered with silent devotion, pressing his body against the two most precious lives in his world. "Should we have done more?" Sam murmured, breaking the heavy quiet as he scanned his notes, unable to look away from the screen. "We did what we had to," Megan answered, voice steady but threaded with doubt. "Now we wait. Sometimes that's the hardest thing in the world." Night crept over the sanctuary, the kind of desert night that brings coyotes from the shadows and rattles windows with wind that never brings rain. Megan and Sam traded shifts by the monitors, neither able to truly sleep, each haunted by the specter of what-ifs. Hours passed in that suspended state. Willow, impossibly small, nursed with fragile determination, her tiny paws kneading Ruby's fur. Megan saw in that struggle all the wild hope she'd ever known, the belief that something new could survive, even when the odds were stacked so brutally high. But Ruby's energy flagged, her movements slow, her eyes glassy with pain. Megan found herself whispering encouragement at the screen, as if her words could travel through wires and reach the battered Bobcat mother. "You're almost there. Just a little longer, sweetheart." Thunder rumbled on the horizon, the air charged with electricity. It felt as if the whole desert was waiting, every living thing pausing on the knife's edge between disaster and deliverance. Outside, predators moved restlessly in the night. Once a coyote trotted close to the sanctuary fence, pausing to sniff the air before slinking away. Another time, a barn owl landed on the branch above the den, its golden eyes gleaming in the infrared camera's glow. But Leo was vigilant. Every time danger threatened, he rose in silence, hackles raised, a living shield between his fragile family and the hungry dark. Inside the cabin, Megan watched him with a fierce, aching pride. "He's not going to let anything happen to them," she whispered, mostly to herself. Sam, who had always believed in letting nature take its course, found himself rooting for the bobcats with a desperation that surprised him. He glanced at Megan, seeing the exhaustion and hope etched into every line of her face. "You should get some sleep," he said gently. Megan shook her head, refusing. "If she makes it through tonight, she'll make it. I know it." As the hours dragged toward dawn, Ruby slipped in and out of consciousness. Each time she stirred, Megan held her breath. Willow squirmed, nuzzling close, her mewls growing louder, demanding life. The tension became almost unbearable. Megan clung to hope, to the memory of the courage it had taken to intervene, to the certainty that compassion was sometimes the only rule that mattered. Then, at the edge of sunrise, it happened. On the camera feed, Ruby lifted her head and nudged Willow, who squeaked and flailed her tiny paws. Ruby's eyes cleared just a little. She gave a hoarse, guttural cry, half pain, half defiance. With a trembling tongue, she began to lick Willow, cleaning her, urging her on, coaxing her from the brink. Megan let out a sound, half sob, half laughter, her whole body shaking with relief. Sam grinned, exhausted and elated. She did it. They both did. They watched as Ruby, still weak but determined, dragged herself upright and let Willow nurse, wrapping her body around her kitten in a protective curl. Leo nosed close, eyes bright with wonder, then licked Ruby's ear as if to say thank you, as if he understood that this moment was nothing less than a miracle. The world outside brightened with the first rays of dawn, turning the desert gold and crimson. Megan wiped her eyes and squeezed Sam's hand, neither needing words. They had risked everything, and for one impossible night, it had been enough. For a long time they simply watched, two humans, silent witnesses to the wild. Megan found herself whispering again, words meant for Ruby but echoing in her own heart. "You did it. You're safe now." But as the sun climbed higher, reality crept in. The sanctuary's rules had been broken. Sooner or later, someone would notice the supplies missing from the kit, the shift in the report, the evidence that a line had been crossed. Megan and Sam shared a look, part relief, part dread, but neither regretted what they had done. Outside, the world moved on. Birds sang, the wind picked up, scattering dust in golden light. But inside the den at Red Mesa, a new family clung to life, a testament to the stubborn power of hope, and to the risk two humans had taken when the wild called for help. Megan stepped onto the porch, breathing deep, letting the morning settle around her like a blessing. The desert, wounded but beautiful, stretched to the horizon. Somewhere in that fragile space, a mother and her newborn slept in the safety of their own world, watched over by the mate who had never left their side. It would be a long road ahead. No guarantees, no safety. But for now, there was life, and the quiet promise of something more. The sunrise over Red Mesa brought not only light, but a trembling sense of relief. For the first time in days, the air seemed to soften, the hard lines of shadow melting as golden warmth slid over the battered land. In the den by the old cottonwood, Ruby and Leo rested, their newborn nestled between them, alive, fragile, and fiercely protected. In the ranger station, Megan and Sam sat side by side in silence. It was the kind of quiet that comes only after the storm, the quiet of exhaustion, of nerves stretched thin and finally allowed to rest. Megan had barely touched her coffee. She stared at the monitors, afraid to look away, as if doing so might somehow tip the balance and undo the miracle they'd helped bring about. Sam broke the silence first. "You know, I never thought I'd see it," he said, his voice hoarse. "Wild bobcats, trusting us enough to let us help. A new life right there in front of us." Megan nodded, rubbing her eyes with the back of her hand. "We broke every rule in the book." Her words hung in the air, half fearful, half triumphant. Sam tried to smile. Sometimes you have to. Sometimes the only rule that matters is the one that keeps something alive. A sense of awe settled over the cabin. Megan watched as Ruby, exhausted but alert, licked Willow's tiny head, her movements careful but determined. Leo hovered close, never letting his guard down, his body curled protectively around his family. Every now and then, he would nose at Megan's direction on the camera, as if checking to be sure the two-legged allies were still watching. As the hours slipped by, word of the intervention began to trickle out among the staff. A young seasonal ranger, Jamie, stopped by the cabin after a morning perimeter check. He found Megan and Sam deep in quiet conversation, reports stacked high but ignored. "Hey," Jamie said, hesitating in the doorway. "I heard something happened with the Bobcats?" Megan tensed. Sam answered first, choosing his words carefully. "There was a complication. The mother was in distress, so we assisted." Jamie's eyes widened. We're not supposed to," Megan interrupted, her tone gentle but firm. "We did what we had to. It was the only way to save her and her kitten." A long silence followed. Jamie stared at the screen, watching Willow squirm in her mother's fur. Finally, he nodded, awe and uncertainty mingling in his expression. "Guess I'd have done the same. How could you not?" The news spread quietly at first. A rumor passed in the parking lot, a whisper over lunch. Some rangers were troubled, shaking their heads and muttering about boundaries and precedent. Others were quietly moved, inspired by the glimpse of compassion at work. By noon, the story had reached the sanctuary director. Megan braced herself for a reprimand, but it didn't come. Not that day. Instead, the sanctuary seemed to settle into a new rhythm. Megan and Sam took turns monitoring Ruby and her family, checking the den from a respectful distance and making sure the area remained clear of other predators. Jamie volunteered for extra patrols, his enthusiasm contagious, bringing fresh water and checking the perimeter more often than required. There was a subtle shift among the staff. People lingered longer at the monitors, rooting for Willow's every movement, debating the ethics of intervention in hushed tones. One of the older rangers, Elena, surprised everyone by leaving a bouquet of wildflowers on Megan's desk, her only comment a gruff, "For the little one. Good luck." For Megan, the emotional impact was deeper still. Each time she saw Ruby's eyes meet the lens, she felt a rush of gratitude and humility. The boundary between watcher and watched, between caretaker and wild, seemed forever changed. She found herself reflecting on her own losses, her grief softened now by the knowledge that sometimes courage meant crossing the line, if only to give hope one more chance. For Sam, the experience shifted something fundamental. He drafted an article for the sanctuary's internal newsletter, The Ethics of Intervention, When Rules Meet Compassion. He cited their experience with Ruby and Willow, presenting both sides of the debate. Should sanctuaries hold to strict non-interference? Or was there a place for mercy, for measured help, when nature's hand became too heavy? The article sparked conversation and even some heated debate among staff at lunch, but also admiration for Sam's willingness to ask the hard questions. Outside, the family of Bobcats grew stronger. Ruby regained her energy, slowly at first, but each day found her more alert, more able to care for Willow. Leo hunted at night, bringing back small offerings, field mice, a hapless rabbit, even a plump quail one lucky morning. Willow thrived, nursing often, her tiny mules growing louder and more insistent. Once, on a cloudless afternoon, Megan saw the kitten take her first wobbly steps in the den's entrance, nearly tumbling over Leo's tail as he watched with amused patience. The changes weren't just in the wild. Megan and Sam found themselves changed too. They shared more, stories, old regrets, dreams for the sanctuary's future. Megan mentored Jamie, teaching him not just about wildlife management, but about compassion, courage, and the price that sometimes had to be paid for doing what was right. One evening, as the sun set and the sky blazed with color, Megan stood at the edge of the sanctuary with Sam and Jamie. Together they watched Ruby, Leo, and Willow emerge from the den, the kitten bold now, pouncing at moths in the tall grass. Megan felt tears prick her eyes, not from sorrow but from the overwhelming beauty of survival, of connection, of having risked everything and been rewarded with life. As night fell and the Bobcat family slipped back into the shadows, Megan turned to Sam, a smile tugging at her lips. "Do you think they'll remember us?" she asked. Sam looked thoughtful. "Maybe not in the way we remember, but I think for a moment we shared something that changed all of us." Megan nodded, watching the stars blink to life above Red Mesa. The boundaries had shifted. Compassion had rewritten the rules, if only for a day. And in that space, a new family thrived, wild and free. Summer deepened over Red Mesa, bringing with it a sense of change, a slow, profound shift that reached into every corner of the sanctuary. Grass grew back along the creek beds, coaxed by the rare rainstorm that finally broke the drought. The desert seemed to breathe again, wildflowers painting the slopes in sudden color, and the air filled with the low hum of bees and the high, clear call of distant hawks. The Bobcat family remained at the heart of the sanctuary, a living testament to hope and second chances. Ruby, lean but no longer frail, hunted again at dusk, teaching Willow the art of silent stalking through the underbrush. Leo patrolled the boundaries, his golden eyes alert to coyotes and stray dogs, but his gait was lighter now, his tail held high. Willow herself became a spark of mischief and energy, pouncing after butterflies, scaling low branches, and practicing her wild voice on anything that moved. For Megan, watching Willow's first solo hunt was like seeing her own pain transformed, a flicker of joy that softened old wounds. Life at the sanctuary adjusted to a new normal. The story of the intervention had become legend, whispered among staff and volunteers with a mixture of pride and awe. Some, like Jamie, took the lesson to heart, growing more attentive and empathetic in their work. Others held tighter to the rules, warning that compassion could not always outweigh consequence. Yet even those who had first objected found themselves pausing by the monitors a little longer, quietly rooting for Willow and her family. Megan, changed by the experience, became a mentor in a deeper way. She taught Jamie and the new recruits not just about tracking and observation, but about the quiet burden of leadership. Every decision leaves a mark, she'd tell them during morning briefings. You have to live with what you choose, whether it's following the rules or following your gut. Her own conviction had solidified, not arrogance, but a hard-won clarity born from pain and redemption. She encouraged questions, invited debate, and never hid the cost of caring too much. Sam, too, was transformed. The article he'd written about the ethics of intervention didn't stay confined to the sanctuary newsletter. It found its way into the hands of wildlife professionals across the state, sparking discussion at conferences and on online forums. Some called him reckless, others courageous. Sam didn't mind the debate. He wanted people to wrestle with the questions that had haunted him for years. When do we step in? How do we balance protection with respect for the wild? Is there ever a time when breaking the rules becomes its own kind of service? As weeks turned into months, Megan noticed a change not just in policy, but in the way the sanctuary worked. There was more willingness to review, to reconsider, to weigh the needs of the wild with the compassion of the human heart. When a young coyote limped through the boundary fence, the team gathered not just to observe but to discuss, really discuss, whether intervention might be justified and what the consequences would be, not just for the animal, but for the sanctuary's integrity. Compassion was no longer an afterthought. It was part of the conversation. In quiet moments, Megan would sometimes walk the sanctuary's perimeter at sunset. She liked to pause near the ridge where, most evenings, she could spot Ruby, Leo, and Willow watching her from the scrub. There was never any approach, no attempt to close the gap. Instead, there was a silent, mutual acknowledgement, a nod across the ancient divide between wild and human. Megan always nodded back, feeling a warmth spread through her, a sense of connection that needed no words. For Megan, the lessons went beyond policy or even personal healing. She had learned that boundaries were real, but not always rigid. The wild did not belong to her, nor she to it, but they could meet, for a moment, in a space of understanding. Grief, she realized, did not disappear, but it could be transformed. Each time she saw Willow scamper after her mother, she felt her own losses ease, replaced by gratitude for the chance to do right, if only once. One autumn afternoon, Megan trained a new ranger, Quinn, who had just arrived from out of state. They sat by the waterhole, the sun low and orange, as Ruby and Willow hunted in the distance. Quinn listened, wide-eyed, as Megan described the events of that spring, the debate, the fear, the moment she chose to act. "Weren't you scared you'd be wrong?" Quinn asked softly. Megan considered the question, the answer coming easier now. "Always, that's the nature of it. But sometimes doing nothing is its own kind of mistake." Quinn nodded, looking thoughtful. "I want to do right by them, but I don't always know what that means." Megan smiled, a genuine weary smile. "None of us do, not always. But we keep trying, that's the work. And if you listen, really listen, the wild will teach you as much as any textbook ever could." The sanctuary felt different now, a little more open, a little more human, without losing its wildness. Megan found herself looking forward to the future, to the new rangers she would train, the debates she would have, the animals she would watch, sometimes from afar, sometimes from the edge of intervention. Sam, standing at the edge of a conference room weeks later, told a group of young biologists, "We don't have all the answers. Sometimes we have to invent them. But if we forget compassion, we forget what it means to be truly wild and truly human." And on the other side of the sanctuary, as dusk deepened and the stars flickered to life, Ruby, Leo, and Willow prowled the shadows, forever wild, but now sometimes pausing to watch the humans in return. The boundary remained, respected but transformed, a living legacy of risk, courage, and the faith that sometimes the wildest trust is built one risk at a time. Years slipped by, but the memory of that spring at Red Mesa never faded. The drought, the risk, the moment when boundaries blurred, these stories became the quiet heartbeat of the sanctuary, retold by every new ranger who arrived, and every old friend who returned to walk the winding trails at dusk. On a late summer evening, Megan Carter climbed the ridge that overlooked the heart of Red Mesa. She moved slower now, her hair shot through with more silver, her face lined by time and sun. But her eyes were as clear and searching as ever. She carried no clipboard, no radio, just a battered pair of binoculars and a mind full of memories. Below her, the sanctuary stretched golden in the long light. The creek was flowing again after a season of blessed rains, the grass tall and rich, wildflowers crowding the banks. In the hush, Megan could hear the thrum of insects, the call of a distant hawk, the sound of wind moving through the cottonwoods. She breathed it in, feeling the wildness settle deep in her chest. For a while she simply watched. Shadows lengthened, dappling the canyon floor, and deer picked their way down to drink. The world felt balanced, if only for this moment. Fragile, beautiful, endlessly unfinished. It was then she saw them. Ruby, Leo, and Willow, now full grown, slipping from the undergrowth at the edge of the meadow. Willow moved with the confidence of youth, but carried her mother's alert grace, her father's powerful stride. Ruby, though older and slower, still commanded respect, a matriarch now, as much a part of Red Mesa as the stones beneath Megan's boots. Leo lingered in the background, watchful as ever, the silent guardian of his family. Megan lifted the binoculars, tracking their movement. She smiled as Willow paused at the water's edge, lapping at the creek while Ruby watched over her. Leo joined them, and the three nuzzled together, a tableau of wild devotion. No human hand would ever tame them, and Megan had never wished to try. The gift was not in changing the wild, but in learning to see it, really see it, on its own terms. Standing on the ridge, Megan remembered every detail, the panic and hope of that night, the moment Leo had met her gaze and let her pass, the trembling newborn in Ruby's arms. She remembered the risk, the fear of consequence, the silent prayer that what she'd done had been the right thing. She remembered the first time she'd watched Willow stumble after a butterfly, and the way her heart had ached with joy and regret, all mixed together. The sanctuary had changed since then. Not just the land, greener, more alive, but the people, too. There was a new ranger at Megan's side these days, Quinn, now weathered by a few seasons and many lessons. Sam still called, sending updates from the research stations he now visited across the West. His words always returning to that spring, and the way it had opened his eyes. Jamie, once a rookie, now led his own teams, passing on the story of the Bobcats and the lesson that sometimes the hardest choice is the right one. Policy had evolved, quietly but unmistakably. The old rules about non-intervention were still there, but now they made room for heart as well as mind. When debate arose over an orphaned fawn, a wounded hawk, a lost coyote, Megan saw younger rangers weighing both the letter and the spirit of the rules, wrestling with hard questions instead of turning away. Compassion was no longer whispered. It was expected, woven into the fabric of Red Mesa's work. Megan was proud of that. Not because she had led the charge, but because she had been brave enough once to break the silence. The sun touched the horizon, burning orange and crimson, painting the world in fleeting fire. The Bobcat family lingered at the water, sharing a last drink before melting into the shadows. Megan lowered her binoculars, her throat tight with something that was not quite sadness and not quite joy. She thought of all the boundaries she'd crossed. Not just the fence lines of the sanctuary, but the invisible ones in her own heart. She thought of the pain she'd carried, the mistakes she'd made, the courage it had taken to keep going when grief threatened to swallow her whole. And she thought, too, of the way the wild had met her halfway, offering trust when she least expected it. There was no handshake, no softening of wild eyes, no easy ending. Only the quiet acknowledgement between species. You are here. I am here. We survived. Quinn climbed the ridge to join her, standing quietly at her side. Together they watched as the valley below slipped into darkness, the last glimmer of light catching on a bobcat's ear before all was shadow and night. Do you ever regret it? Quinn asked softly, breaking the silence. Taking the risk? Megan shook her head. No, not for a second. The wild isn't about playing it safe. It's about meeting life as it comes. And sometimes, just sometimes, being brave enough to do what's right, even if it costs you. Quinn nodded, absorbing the lesson. I hope I'd have done the same. Megan smiled, placing a steadying hand on the young ranger's shoulder. You will. When it matters, you'll know. For a long time they stood in silence, 2 generations linked by the choices that shaped the land and the hearts that called it home. As darkness claimed the mesa, Megan whispered the truth that had guided her through every trial, every loss, every hope. In the end, it's not about taming the wild. It's about having the courage to meet it where it lives, and sometimes, just sometimes, earning its trust. The sun was gone, the sky alight with stars, the land both unchanged and forever altered. Wild and human, predator and protector, watched and watcher, each carrying the memory of the night when compassion crossed the line, and nothing would ever be quite the same. The ridge was quiet, the world at peace, and in the deepening dark, Megan felt herself a part of something infinite, fragile, wild, and beautiful, exactly as it was meant to be.